Hello Year 11, this is a screencast to help you with the Section C aspect of the practice exam that we gave out during exam preparation time in English. Before you carry on with this, you need to pause if you haven't read this article in full, including the background information. I'd suggest you have a pencil on you and you're making some notes as you go when you read it the first time, because I'm sure there are things that will strike you as persuasive in nature while you read. So just make a little notation of that. Then you can come back and finish listening to this. All right, to begin with, the background information should give you enough to complete the coast element, which is the introduction part of your language analysis. So first you need to start with your orientation, and it's clear that screen addiction has become an issue in today's society, especially when it comes to how much time today's youth should be spending in front of the screen. This sentence should be rephrased, and that can be used as your orientation. The author's contention is possibly that we in fact don't know that we are addicted. There is a growing number of people that don't realize how much they depend upon their screens and technology, and how that's removing them from being socially in contact with people, and there are potentially negative ramifications for that. But in sum, her contention is that there are quite a number of people who are addicted and don't realize it as yet. The audience, I would suggest, is people who are concerned themselves about their own use of technology and how much time they spend on it, and possibly parents, teachers, etc., those who are in charge of or responsible for young people, and might be concerned about the way in which they use technology and what impact that's having on them long term, not just in the immediate time frame, as in not being able to sleep, but like long term, how do we go about forming relationships, etc. Does our use of technology inhibit this and stop us from forming relationships? So while I'm going, you can be jotting notes, adding to your own annotations so that you know what you're going to write about. The style of this piece is an opinion piece. It is published in the Weekend Australian. The tone of this piece changes throughout. It begins in a concerned manner as she uses the anecdote to engage the readers and to inform them about the issue and to help them maybe connect with it and give them an example that they might relate to and that they themselves might have experienced with the particularly popular Apple Watch. It then moves into more informative tone as she utilizes examples of experts and studies and other business people, etc., who share her concerns and also have written or spoken about this issue in some way, shape or form in a public forum, and they are considered expert on the issue. Finally, she ends in kind of a warning tone using this hour guard individual to demonstrate the kind of negative outcome if we don't step in and do something. So this is her conclusion and her call to action, or basically identification of what might go wrong if we don't do something about that, and that is increasing narcissism for us all if we don't stop being so selfish and concerned with ourselves by going on devices, and instead engage with those people around us on a one-on-one basis and build those relationships. So let's look at the article. The first thing you'll notice is this image. It's a familiar scene, people at breakfast on their devices, not talking. It's an illustration of reality, that we don't have conversations. Sometimes we just sit there on our devices. This is reiterated in the text when she talks about being out for dinner at a Japanese restaurant, and to her horror, the people next to her, the family, 2 parents, 2 kids, all on their mobile phones, ignoring each other. It's also a subtle suggestion that possibly we ourselves have done this and we can relate, and therefore we might be more receptive, therefore, to her suggestion about change towards the end and what we need to do about it. The title itself, Are You a Screen Addict? How to Tell If Your Device is Controlling You. This title reinforces the belief that we ourselves might relate to this, because possibly we see ourselves in this picture and secretly think we might be screen addicts and are looking for some advice about how we can deal with that, and basically diagnose ourselves to decide whether we are or aren't, and what must happen and what the ramifications of that are. This picture also links again to the quote she has from David Gifflin, who writes in this section here, Sydney psychologist, clinical psychologist, who says that we're being removed from intimacy as our phones and devices distract us from the beauty and complexities of life. And so in this case here, it's the same thing. There is a lack of intimacy between these two people. They're kind of living their own separate lives on their devices and having no interaction with each other. We then move into the article. We've got the author, Ruth Ostrow, and you should have identified this in your orientation section. The fact that it's in response to a program on 60 Minutes, where it was published, when it was published, title, and author, Ruth Ostrow. She uses the anecdote, a personal anecdote about her own experience with the Apple Watch and why she got it and what it was supposed to do, in that it was supposed to stop her reaching for a mobile phone when in company, because she thinks that's rude and intrusive. But now, in fact, she's lifting her watch up 100 times a day, which suggests that she is no more engaged with the people around her, and it is becoming more of a distraction than her phone was. The tone she uses here is quite concerned, and it helps you, the reader, feel as if you might be able to relate, because we've all been in situations where, for example, we might have been at the chiropractor and we were on our device and got told off for it because we weren't paying enough attention to either people around us or what they wanted us to do. You then move into page 3, or page 6 on your example, sorry, and you've got this woman here. Now, this is a hyperbolic example. It's a massive exaggeration, that the idea that someone would be in the shower on their phone, but she's using it to try and emphasize the serious implications of what will happen if we become so addicted that we can't even go into the shower and have a moment's peace without our device. The reader might then position themselves and think, well, I'm not that bad, but if that's as bad as it can get, maybe Ruth Ostrow, the author, has some solutions to stop me getting to that point. And it potentially makes them more receptive to the ideas that she is talking about in this piece. It also links to this idea over here. We've got this fear of being offline, and the fact that you can't possibly even shower because you're so afraid of what you might miss when you're in there. And she uses quite interesting language choices here to emphasize the idea that it's almost like an addiction, that you can't escape it, and that's reiterated up the top where she goes, device addict. And that language is peppered throughout to kind of show that technology has become almost drug-like, and we really need to treat it in that kind of a careful manner, that's how big of a problem it is. Scrolling on down, we've got this Alan Platcher gentleman from APA Management Services. Now, he's a big wig and a friend of hers, and I think the point there is showing that if this gentleman, Alan Platcher, who is a very successful business and in charge of quite a large firm and has a lot to do with the business industry in Australia, suffers from device addiction, then, well, it's no surprise that so do we. So therefore, we think that somehow we're a little bit forgiven for our addiction, because if Alan Platcher can't escape it, neither can we. But we as well, like he's thinking about, need to figure out ways to turn off, which initially scares Ruth herself. You know, she starts panicking and her hands get all sweaty, etc. She doesn't know what to do with herself. And that's probably a feeling that might confront some of you if you think about turning your phone off for 24 hours and not knowing what's going on in the social media world, etc. She then supports some of these findings with some statistics and things here to substantiate her claim and to prove that she's done her research. Gallup is a popular Australian poll that's conducted by a highly respected organisation, and those stats therefore add weight to her argument. We can then scroll on down and we've got the reiteration of that the image of the family at the Japanese restaurant, this horrifying 2 parents, 2 children, all on their phones. Nobody's talking to each other. And you've got David Gilfin talking about how common this is, and it's a vicious cycle, right? They're a vicious cycle. People reach for them because they're bored and lonely, but only get lonelier. So this is looking at the quite negative outcomes, and it's becoming more concerned the further she gets into it and the more experts that she picks up on. So then you move into Larry Rosen, and he's a professor of psychology at California State University and one of the world's leading authority. He's been writing about it for 3 decades. So his position is basically almost presented as irrefutable. He has so much experience and wealth of knowledge that what he says must be taken as gospel and therefore must be adhered to. Again, just before that though, we had some language here again about this idea of addiction, and we've got the mention of gambling as an addiction and the linking of those similar ideas with the chemical of dopamine to phones, and saying how unhealthy it is, and it's a health risk really. All right, scrolling on down, and we've got another expert in here, Ramis Algard, I suppose, Orgard, however you want to say his name. And he's an international corporate advisor at the Potential Project. And whilst he's not as informed as Larry Rosen is, for example, he himself is able to make comment about this idea that multitasking is a myth, and the fact that we think we can share ourselves between our devices and what we're presently doing with either people or across multiple devices is silly, and that we're not in fact saving any time. We are wasting time between them and not really forming the relationships we need to in order to be healthy individuals. And this is emphasized by Susan Greenfield. So he set the scene with this 60 to 70 times a day that we're on we're unlocking our phones for 3 minutes at a time, which if you add that up, that's a lot of wasted time. And then you've got Susan Greenfield, Professor of Synaptic Pharmacology at Lincoln College in Oxford. That's England, very highly sought after place to study. You've got lots of smarties there. She's saying that possibly we have this problem where we are unable to make the social contact we need and form ourselves in terms of our brain, body, etc., to connect with other people. And this might have lasting ramifications on how we can form relationships in future, whether we can fall in love, etc., etc., because we're not engaging with people, and therefore we are not forming the relationships and all the other physical and mental elements that occur when we interact in person with people as opposed to on technology. So she ends on quite a serious note to emphasize the seriousness of the issue and serve as a warning for our readers. Rather than a call to action, this is a warning, a cautionary tale of what could happen. And her final comment, "It took you a long time to fall in love, it will take you a long time to fall out of it," leaves the readers with the final thought that there is no quick fix to this screen addiction, and it will take them some time to get over. So you might comment on that as you conclude your paper. All right, that wraps up the kind of very brief overview of each element, but you need to connect those ideas into 3 different arguments. I would first focus on the first image of the couple, then I would look at how that's reiterated with the family at the Japanese restaurant, and then the David Gilfin quotes and information. Then I would switch and look at her personal anecdote to begin with, the tone she uses there, then the use of her friend Alan Platcher as an example. Finally, I would look at the way that she uses experts like Larry Rosen, Ramis Algard, etc., to really substantiate her claim and consolidate her ideas. And then I'd finish with a brief comment on the serious tone and the use of Susan Greenfield as a cautionary tale, as opposed to any call to action. It's about cautioning you on what could happen and why we need to put down the device. Good luck with your writing.